Hi, hello everybody, and welcome back. I'm Random Randy, and today we're going to take a look at pneumatic tubes. Now, this can apply to travel. This can apply to sending mail, but we're going to start off in the kind of what the futuristic idea of pneumatic tubes is, and where it kind of ties into like the tartaria research and things like that. Now, a lot of us feel that there was a previous time that may have been something more like the Jetsons, as opposed to the Flintstones, that our current paradigm is. Now, in Futurama, of course, they demonstrate pneumatic tubes for travel, and you see that, and it's, laughed at by most people, like, haha, that's silly and everything. But we'll get into why it may have actually been something that was in use in the past, in that analog past that I often talk about. Some might call it steampunk or Victorian, but we'll stick with analog. Okay. It was just a previous age. What that time frame looks like for when that age was, we don't exactly know. But there's a lot of nods to the previous time in Futurama, like the Titanic mock-up sitting down here at the bottom of the ocean with a pneumatic tube flying right by it. Um, and there's a lot of things moving forward now, like the hyperloop thing. We even see some stuff like in certain very, very wealthy people's homes. Apparently, they have the means to use pneumatic tubes to go from one story to another. So, if we're able to do this, like current nowadays, is it possible that this is something that had been functional in the past, that we were able to use kind of like in a wholesale manner, like everybody was included in? Now, there are also some interesting nods to pipelines kind of being used to send people and maybe other things around. It really kind of makes me wonder about the arguments for installing, oil pipelines and things like that in in the Balkans and whatnot. So, it's interesting to note that people can be loaded into one of these pipe pigs, which they use to apparently flush out the pipes, and they can be moved from place to place, unbeknownst to everybody else around. So, that in itself is incredibly interesting. Makes you wonder about what pipelines are really up to. Is it all just oil? Are we moving people? Are we moving other products? And most of us just don't know about it. I mean, these things go under the ocean vast, distances. So that's a thought there. And many of us look at Futurama and go, was this a nod to, the previous civilization? Again, with the time frame, we just don't know. There's some thoughts by Anatoly Fomenko about being an extra 1,000 years added in. I'm curious about the ice ages and whether those were really as unpopulated as we're told they are, or if they were populated by a people that was really able to use steam and pneumatics and things like that to kind of get around the rough climate. So that's a thought. And it all ties in with the plasma event and mud flood and everything else. Just leaves a lot up for debate, really. But you may be asking, how does this apply to the old world, Randy? Well, we're going to take a look here. This is the 19th century pneumatic atmospheric subway. Now, what we're really told is there's a couple instances. There's one in New York by Mr. Beach. Um, he installed a very short pneumatic subway and demonstrated it for some time. We'll go into some details on that, but first let's take a look kind of at the pictures here and see what we're dealing with. And you can see that these look just like hanging pipelines. And I'm wondering if these tubes or these pipelines weren't remnants of a previous, maybe larger civilization. Um, Perhaps it could be called the first Roman Empire. Like we don't really know, but we do know that based on literature and paintings and findings and things, that Rome seemed to have had an Eastern and a Western empire. So what does that mean? That means that America may very well have just been another branch of the old Roman Empire, which at some point, based on historical narrative, fell. And we wind up kind of in the dark about the real truth behind, especially North America. There's a lot of hidden truth on Tartaria, on what California really was. Was it a part of Tartaria? There's a lot of debate up right now. But today we're looking at just another piece of technology that kind of has gone backwards in a sense over time. And, if you're in the aliens in Area 51 circle, you might understand that there's a possibility that these hyperloop type things are actually, underground. But one thing I will kind of note is what we are told about pneumatics, and this is in 1967. I've seen even earlier maps of underneath Paris, and it's interesting that this 1967 one is all I could find now. But I'd seen previous ones before. Let's see here. Um, oh, here we go. There we are. Okay. So this is the earlier version there. So it's out there. The idea that Paris had a fully pneumatic system, in the 1800s, it's seeming legit. There's a lot of information out there for it. So now, what's interesting is we have these etchings. Of course, it's always etchings, right? In a period of time where photography was they were capable of photographing things. So, um, another proof that there were technologies far superior to the time when they were introduced is the pneumatic tube saga of the 19th century. And what we know today is the hyperloop was used in New York, called the Beach Pneumatic Transit in 1867, also in London at the Crystal Palace Pneumatic Railway in 1864, and a few other places prior to the mentioned dates here. So we have an article stating that in 1799, inventor George Medhurst proposed an idea to move goods through cast iron pipes using air pressure. In 1844, he built a railway station for passenger carriages in London that relied on pneumatics until 1847. So this is all going on, right in the time of revolutions and power shifts and struggles and things. So, there's a lot that was lost to us during this time. Technology is one of those things. Our tech trees get very screwed up right around this time. So let's take a look at the beach transit here in just a moment. So throughout the mid 1850s, several more pneumatic railways were built in Dublin, London, Paris, etc. They were meant to transport parcels, but were large enough to carry people too. So it's very interesting. And here's a kind of a rendition of what these looked like. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, you go back here and you see in James Bond, right, this same exact thing being portrayed as only cleaning out the pipes, like the oil pipelines and things. Now, keep in mind, if they're able to move things with air, they can also move them with hydraulic force. So very interesting, right? Like, did you know that this existed underneath the feet of several cities in the 1800s? We really don't hear too much about it. I'll show you what we do here in a little bit. Now, I had put this up on my Instagram yesterday, and it's just interesting. We have these large statured people here, and then we have this conductor looking guy who's obviously, a head and shoulders shorter than everybody else. And these folks seem mighty tall, but maybe it's just a perspective, right? So we really don't know. It's interesting stuff nonetheless to speculate on larger peoples. Are these the same peoples that we are currently calling like Anunnaki and gods and things like that? It's a possibility. So there's just this weird thing happening when you look at old world etchings and some photos of post fire, San Francisco. We find these larger statured people. I mean, it just keeps coming up over and over and over again. So it's very interesting to say the least. But this is the mail, and they can also send people through these pneumatic tubes. Now, these tubes, may have been just transitioned over and used after the fact for sewage, which, maybe how they solved the sewage crisis of the late 1800s was because they already had all this stuff in place. They just could no longer use it for transporting goods. And so they use it for sewage after that. So we've got an image here of the U.S. Pneumatic Dispatch. And again, it's an etching. What can we do to find real pictures of these things? I mean, we have one, but that's it. So this is in the 1860s. Supposedly, they ran postal service through pneumatic tubes. So I mean, it was a very analog age. Information being sent by paper or other parcel going through these tubes as opposed to digitally through the air like we do today. So it's very interesting. Now getting into 1853, we have the Dalkey Atmospheric Railway. This is in Ireland. And when they say atmospheric, it doesn't necessarily have to mean the entire train is moved by uh tube. There's apparently a pneumatic actuating tube here below. Now when we get further in, and this is where it gets interesting, we have the New York City subway. This is in 1904, and this is 37 years after the beach pneumatic transit. Now we want to take a look at the beach pneumatic transit really quickly. Let's take a look here. So imagine you pay your nickel and you take your ride, a cylindrical subway car with plush Angora seats and gas lights above your hat. So, gaslighting. Also, we have some thoughts that maybe there was a lot more electric in place. We're just being told kind of a story about gas. But, it does make a lot of sense that there would be gas works and things like that in a very analog kind of steampunk-esque era. And so just imagine you go and you hop in, you got these beautiful plush seats, right? Beautiful, beautiful atmosphere, really. So imagine, you go for that ride, and keep in mind that this is after the fact here. This is the New York 1904 regular subway that has been put into what may have been used for this pneumatic line prior. Okay. So it's like they retrofitted this and turned it into something very like Disneyland esque. Even this guy's face is all like drawn in, which is strange because you go to the next photo and he's just sitting there. I don't know if he's part of the 13 families or what. Why they would want to draw over his face is interesting to me. Now, Alfred Eli's Beaches, as a matter of fact, and more than a few others. Now, in 1868, inventor Beach, who was also the publisher and editor of Scientific American. So this is another one of those situations, guys, where things are being attributed to like just one person instead of there being an entire tech tree behind it, like behind it coming up. Um, there's a lot of instances like that. So the editor and publisher of Scientific American proposed a pneumatic subway system for the city of New York. After all, it was just an upscaling of the pneumatic mail system used within and between buildings. What pneumatic mail system, you might ask? We've got a great insight into that here in just a moment. So New York City almost had a pneumatic subway system, but political, legal, and financial reasons kept it from expanding, as well as some technical difficulties. So it seems technical difficulties were last on the list as far as why this wouldn't work. So it was called an atmospheric railroad because it used vacuum and overpressure systems. And so it's wild stuff. There's stuff we just don't really hear about. What the kind of going narrative is that patents sometimes only had a fuzzy vision of how their systems would look, so they couldn't recreate a lot of this stuff. They would just have kind of components patented, like the tube itself or the car itself or the blower or the station facility. And this reminds me a lot of what it was looking like for architecture in the same period of time. um because this is just beautiful, right? It doesn't seem as though it's come from the same hands of these bowler hat types that we see later standing on the ruins and the wreckage. So, look how, just to show how beautiful this thing was. And, apparently this thing was sitting on a rail and apply that pressure and it would just whiz right on through. Very incredible, Victorian-esque, right? Um, Now, a lot of this technology, the thing that it takes manpower to keep it running, to keep it maintained, right? And everything else. And this is from the movie The Kingsman. Okay. And so when we see things in Hollywood and they're representative of high technology, you got to ask yourself, was this something from like our past? Right. It's very, very interesting stuff. And we're just not told the stories. And there's engravings, tons of engravings, tons of literature and information on these. Um and it's just beautiful artwork. We're being shown an underground that we do not really understand in our current narrative. And we're told that most of this was implemented in like the early 1900s. Of course, we have nice checker flooring here, little nod to the Masons there. And it just makes me wonder. It really makes me wonder, like, was some of this stuff from the previous civilization, and was that civilization the what we come to know today as like the rebels, you know, or the losers of the revolution? Like, it's wrapped up in a neat bow when we hear about the Revolutionary War, it being between Britain and America, and so on. But I'm of the mind that Britain and America are one and the same, or Britain and the U.S. rather. And there was a free, some people call it tartaria, but let's just say a freer grouping of society that was kind of self-governed, which we've come to know as the rebels, right? We've come to know as these slave driving rebel armies. And and we see how these things were made even back in the 1800s by like a shield barrier deal, and then putting the brick in behind it, very similar to what we do today with a giant machine. So, we have some examples of what the equipment looked like. This is if I'm not mistaken, this is going to be the one that Beach created, and it just went for a little ways underground, and then later they turned that stop and several others rather into the New York city subways. So, I mean, this thing, and this is running underneath Paris also, which is interesting. Okay. It's running underneath Paris also. They like to kind of say that it's just only for mail, but I really doubt that, guys, because now we have, the postal pneumatics and things, and we have the map of these tubes, pneumatic tubes in Paris down here. We're told they're just mail tubes. I'm not so sure, guys. I think a lot of these tubes are what was later turned into the current underground system here. So I think it's just a repurposing, you know what I mean? A repurposing of something very, very interesting, very beautiful, something like this, and then they held on to a couple of the lines, retrofitted them for their third rail trains and things. So it's interesting. It's a very strange thing. And we see like evidence of this similar technology kind of taking place a lot of different places. The Crystal Palace Pneumatic Railway in 1864. Okay, looking very similar infrastructure, very neo-Roman Gothic kind, or neo-Roman like architecture, right? Kind of speaking of the people behind this that built this, maybe. So, we've got some examples, and this was like, oh, the jazz. This was the business. You go on your weekend and go take a little train ride. So this was like the first versions of amusement for these bowler top hat types, right? Woohoo, yay, woo, yeah. Right. So, and then we see a cutaway here of, the underground, where we have freight trains on one side, we have sewage, tubing for different things on another side, right next to the masonry canal that is right along like the main street. This is underneath the Thames River in London. And then we have the pneumatic passenger railway in the very bottom underneath down here, which again, I do feel that they just repurposed a lot of this, turned it into the current London Underground, right? And see, we have the pneumatic kind of package carrying things here. So there's a lot about the underground we're just not told. A lot of it is hidden in these magazines from the time period. And look at how huge this is underground, guys. The station. You know what I mean? And they used a lot of this in World War II to, hide people out during these German raids, and then vice versa. From the Germans had this underground and were able to hide their people from the British raids and the American raids. So, it's just interesting. It's very interesting. Let me see the size of this hall here, and then we see the size of this man. It just brings questions. But you know, um, it makes you wonder, right? Doesn't it make you wonder, like underneath all this mud, if there really was, 20 feet, 10, 15 feet of excess mud on top of everything, Was there a lot of mud everywhere because previously these systems had been built and a lot of earth had been moved and it just was never finished? Did they get snuck up on? Did war come their way before they could finish their civil projects? So there's a lot of possibilities as to why so much mud was around and had to be moved. Mud flood is one of those, but another one is, you know, intervention of people. So were these projects started before the Civil War, before 1800, and maybe just later finished and later adapted by this guy, whoever that guy is? It's curious to say the least. And we have some vague idea of machines in the period of time, steam, cranes and things like that. We don't see too many pictures though. When we're looking at construction, we really don't see much as far as this is concerned. But it's there nonetheless. They were using technology to create a lot of this stuff, whether you want to believe that it was before 1840 or not. The thing is we still had foremen in place directing these people to build. We still had infrastructure, uh, for manner of speaking, in place to create projects like this. And the question is then, were these just projects that were taken over? Maybe they weren't finished, right? And they needed to be finished. So these bowler hat types came over, you know, decimated, like I was looking at in the Battlefield Earth, or is Earth a Giant Battlefield thing, the video that, were these projects there, and did they like get bombed out? What exactly happened? We really don't know. And it's interesting though, because it does seem like humanity is capable of waging war to such an extent. We must have been doing it for a very long time. But anyway, so we see, versions of underground tubing that even in the mid 1800s was looking quite old, quite old. So, right, I mean, this doesn't look like brand new brickwork to me, guys. It's all calcified, kind of like looks like concrete was on here, but it's like since come off. And this is from Lifetime in the 19 somethings. Okay, so yes, it's going to look old there, but I mean, look at this gilded style. Incredible, right? It just makes you wonder what the society was doing before to have achieved so much grandeur and beauty. One might say that the grandeur and the beauty might be on the backs of the layman or your average folk. I can agree with that there. For not everybody would have been able to live in giant palaces or live in these beautiful apartments across the street from the Romanesque, infrastructure that we see in these etchings throughout. So it's incredibly interesting. We really don't know. Let's take a look at New York's pneumatic mail tubes. This is what we think of today when we think of the mail, right? We think of, or when we think of pneumatic tubes, all we think of, well, all we think of are advertisements, apparently. Anyway, all we think of when we think pneumatics, we think of a bank. Maybe you go to Costco or something, and they launch your check, which needs to be run by the office. They'll shoot it up over to the other department, right? But these are the cities that have these in place underground, and we're not really told too much about them. So, it's interesting to say the least that they exist at all, and it's more of that technology that's kind of hidden, and this stuff exists to this day. It's like a backup. See that number 33 there? Interesting. So, we're flying through this real quick just so I can demonstrate to you guys, and then this is the guy that they say was responsible for it. There's always one guy. There's always a number 33. So, it's wild, it's mind-blowing. And so this is what we think of, right? Now imagine though, prior to plastics, you would have iron piping. This technology has been around for some time. I mean, look at what the wealthy folks are using it for, right? Now, what could be sent in the tubes? They've even sent cats. The cat was a little bit shook up, but they've done some really funny things. shooting cats through these tubes and stuff. So they've been experimenting with these for a significant period of time. So if the argument kind of is if they're able to send animals and animals are fine, they were probably at some point sending people, maybe. So let's look at some of the specs. This is what the male tubes are. Only eight and a quarter or 8 and 1/8 inches. Okay, 88. But you could see how this could easily be scaled up. And you can see why they might have had to reclaim some of this material. If you had this like steel piping or iron piping running through the ground everywhere, and let's say for giggles, some electrical event does happen, causing these all to oxidize underground, they would no longer be useful. So you would want to go in behind and kind of salvage that underground tubing or underground piping for your new projects, for ammunition if you're at war, for you know what I mean, for different, and lead was one component of piping in the past. So you may say, well, they don't make ammunition out of iron, but no, they make it out of lead, and they would have had alloys, being used underground. It wouldn't have just been straight iron. It would have rusted away like super fast. So these folks were a lot smarter than we give our predecessors credit for. And this is just showing that in New York, during some of the worst winters, the way the city was kept running was through these tubes. So at a minimum, we've had this pneumatic mail transit, in a period of time when we're shown horse and buggy. Like, horse and buggy was the go-to for a very long time in this country and in other countries. And that's just on surface level, guys. You look below the ground and things and you see, and then they have issues with maintenance. So they're kind of explaining why this has gone away. They have issues with getting to the stuff underground, maintaining it. I think that's bogus. I think that there are underground passages and these pipes just line them, and all they have to do is go down there and fix them. But it becomes a matter of manpower, especially if you are, you know, actively eradicating the previous populations or moving them to, institutions like asylums and things like that. You would not have the people that have the mindset to create and keep up these systems, right? And especially if you're rolling in all these new kids from uh out of the infantoriums and out of the orphanages, and you're not going to have the previous set of skilled workers there to teach these people because you're rolling out the brand new series, the brand new model, right, of homunculus or of human or whatever. Like whatever happened in the 1800s was very strange, and we're not really being told everything. But even to this day, we are not being told everything. Okay. There's things going on in places we do not have access to, we do not have eyes on, much like this New York systems. So most people didn't know about this at the time it was going on. We're finding out about it now after it's defunct and shot down and shut down, right? We're finding out about all of this, and only thing that's visible to us is what we will see at a bank when we go to the drive up and have to launch our signature through to them. That's all that we see. So I beg the question, is there more to this? Do they still have systems like this just waiting to be used for when it hits the fan and they need to be able to send information to each other, without the use of the power, the grid, and things like that? I think they still have these things in place, guys. I don't think they ever went away. I don't think they ever tore them out. I think some of them, yes, the public ones are gone, but when you look at a city like New York, Paris, I mean, and the list goes on, we saw the list in the front. It just becomes obvious that there are alternative methods to everything that we do today, and this is one of those. And this may have been one of those for travel too. I don't think that I think that it's kind of a slap in our face when we're shown things like this, because we may have had these things in the past, in some past. What that past looked like, we really can't say. I'm of the mind that we've got like culture stacked on culture stacked on culture, like kind of indefinitely going back into the past, and that some of those cultures would have had things like this. So, that's just the thought, guys. And I wanted to put that out there and see what you all think. And I want to thank you for tuning in once again. And I hope this information finds you well. Have a beautiful rest of your day and goodbye.